Welcome to another edition of Afternoon Idle. I'm Andrew. I'm a certified mindfulness coach in the Unified Mindfulness System. You can find out more about Unified Mindfulness at unifiedmindfulness.com. And I am many things, but one of the things I am not is a licensed therapist or social worker or a mental health professional. So I'm a meditation coach, but not in those directions. I'll say a lot of things about Zen because I really love Zen, but I'm not authorized in any way as a teacher in that discipline either. So I mainly share them just because I think the stories within Zen are very, very compelling. So I've been a meditation practitioner for somewhere around 10, almost 11 years, something like that. And it's been a remarkably useful thing for me, in addition to the fact that I also see that it's beneficial in not having any use. So today I'm playing around with, I kind of have this notion that may or may not be accessible for folks, but this sort of light notion of just being aware of kind of receiving the stimulus around you, almost like you're a satellite dish, and you're not sending back anything into the environment. You're just receiving what's happening within the environment. And so when I sit with this sort of feeling of being a satellite dish kind of directed into the environment that I'm in. And if you sit outside, this can be a pleasant thing to do outside. So I'll often sort of sit on our patio in the back and kind of just sort of like I'm just sort of a satellite dish to whatever's there. And then knowing what little I know, sort of the dish is meant to kind of help give you or to amplify for the inner antenna, the ability for it to receive and sort of a sensitivity. So in my head, when I'm sitting, I'm kind of imagining this sort of, I'm dropping my labels, but I'm still noting. So we talk about the noting practice comes from one sort of strand of old school Buddhism, namely what's often referred to as the Burmese style. So Burmese practitioners are very keen on that, but there's also a very strong Vipassana, which Vipassana means or is often referred to as insight, but it means seeing what is. So I believe V is to see, and then Passana is the things as they are is another way of looking at it. And so we can, without noting and labeling. So noting and labeling is the Burmese sort of tradition. Without labeling, we can sort of bring about and use our concentration power, and our sensory clarity to notice what's kind of going on. And so this is somewhat pairs well with what we did yesterday, which is this notion of strong back, soft front. And so the front being receptive, but the back still having, like, you're not a pushover is another way to look at a strong back, soft front. So it's like fierce compassion, maybe is another way of looking at that. So this notion, and at least for today, what we normally do here is I'm offering up a part of some previous days. So I appreciate the two loyal folks that have tuned in for this. But so what we'll look at is noticing where our attention is. And so that attention could be on visual stimulus if you choose to keep your eyes open. It could be on the sounds around you. So I often have dogs barking. We had a hailstorm in my neighborhood, so all of my neighbors are replacing their roofs at various points. So hammering and dog barking are the most alive elements within my environment at any given time, at least of late. And so that idea that all sensations are open and something that we would tune into as being our little radar dish. I can also think of this as a way of noting everything. So we're sort of noting all of the things that are possible to come up. And we can do that with the three categories if that's helpful. But here I'm just offering up, let's try, with labeling being optional, let's just try noting those and not labeling them. If that doesn't work, you can always go back to your home base, whatever your home base practice is. So that's where we're headed. Just pause for a moment. If there's any questions, I'll attempt to respond and clarify. Given that I kind of hashed this out like 3 minutes before I hit go live, if any of this makes sense, it's a minor miracle. But confusion can be beneficial at times, but it's not my intent. So, and the bell has returned for another day. Okay. So it sounds like our small cadre of folks are on board, so that's good. So as we do our sort of pre-flight checklist, our pre-sit checklist, I invite you to adopt a posture that helps you to be both relaxed, alert, upright, dignified, settling in and checking to see if there's any tension. As we do this, we'll be aware of areas where we often harbor that tense or contracted kind of feelings. Seeing if the tension will release, and if not, being okay with that. And then shifting in to settle in a bit. Whether it's become annoying or not, I have been evoking the 3 wise sages of the 5 boroughs, the Beastie Boys, and this idea of breathing in slow through the nose, breathing out through the nose. So that slow pace helps to clue in the nervous system of a settling in and activation of the vagus nerve, which helps us get the parasympathetic online. And the slow breaths help us to fill the lower parts of the lungs. So slow and low, that's our tempo. We're just noting where our attention is, allowing it to float and be in any of the sense categories. And you can think about it as we're holding our seat and allowing that sense category to come to us, whatever the activation is. So that might be noises, sounds around you, sensations in the body. You could experiment with your eyes open too today. Being aware of where the eyes are drawn. When we note, we just sort of it's like a mental head nod to where our attention is, and then allowing the attention to soak in. And one last thing to experiment with here is to see how still you can be. So as we settle in, we're in this receiving, sort of open, allowing stance. ever settling in with more and more stillness if possible. So just be in this stance for a while. So you may find when you try to get very still that the body does not want to be still. And so just meeting that with a sort of no big deal kind of quality, if that's the situation for you. So don't need to impose that on the body, but it's a thing to be curious and experiment with. And one more thing to mention as we pass through this. When we're in this sort of open and receiving mode, we're observing. So there's a more, or depending on how you're bringing about the technique, there's a more sort of active and deliberate stance towards where the attention is. So you may be in a stance of observing, or you may be observing and then feeling into that. Totally fine. But it's this observing or feeling into after we've observed that we'll let go of when we transition to do nothing. So you can explore this stance for a bit more. So let's briefly just kind of check in with where we're at. So, in not having the labels, that might leave you feeling a little more scattered, or maybe you didn't have a chance to really connect to that. So, maybe you did. Just kind of noticing where things were from that stage. And then letting go and moving more into this free range stance for the attention, an opportunity to coast. Using no way as way, having no technique as technique. Shift to do nothing. So, as we adopt this choiceless awareness stance, we may notice that we're trying to direct or orchestrate what's going on in our experience. And we're not watching for that, but when we notice that that's going on, we see if we can let that go. Knowing full well that that intention of orchestrating and controlling can come right back up, and we let it go. If we've done that 2 or 3 times, then we can just sort of nod to that being what your sort of unconscious processing wants to have happening. So we let that happen. And optionally, if that's happening more frequently, we can check in with the posture. tune up the posture a bit. And if your eyes have been closed, I invite you to open them, or if your gaze has been dropped, lift it and connect to your surroundings. Thank you again for joining me, and thank you for your practice. If you have any reports or questions, I will endeavor to offer some sort of helpful response. If not, I will see folks tomorrow. Tomorrow, I'm thinking that I may play with doing the more of the Akano sit that I did in the do nothing practice, or a little bit of a revisit to that. Okay, so Sarah has a report that you. Okay, great that you love this. Yes. So go ahead. Question. Wait here a second. So yeah, if you have a question, I'm thinking you're typing. So. And then the other thing, I guess, so I that sit for me, I will often have kind of a pleasant tone to the edges of my skin, which is, I think, well, it's definitely a reward state. I don't know if that's available to everyone, but that's one of the things that when I sit in that stance, I like. So, the Alaskan internet. Okay. I don't know if the solution is less meditation or different meditation. Okay, so less meditation. What comes up for you? I guess would be that, or do you, when you say less meditation, is more less sitting frequently, or different meditation, and so you're going to sit as frequently as you are, but different approach. Okay. Good, because I was like, I'm missing something. The less meditation versus different meditation is or there's always this balance of striving and backing off. So okay. So the initial question from Sarah was if there's such a thing as too much meditation because my brain feels tired. Yes, I think there is, or at least when you hear some of the folks that are classical teachers, this is that we can or it is possible where people can kind of go full bore into meditation. So I'm guilty of doing this myself. In the sanity challenge, the COVID sanity challenge that the 10% Happier did in the like July August timeframe, I was meditating for maybe anywhere between like 90 minutes and 2.5 hours a day. And I was in essence competing, which is not ideal at all. And so that, yeah, so I think a bit of what you're sort of striking, or the tone that you're striking, or the direction that you're pointing, is a little bit to that, the achieving mindset that you'll hear Dan Harris talk a lot about in the 10% Happier podcast. And so Dan himself talks about how he would meditate for 2 hours a day, and so this sounds like a yoga teacher style answer, but there's in Zen, at least, like I said, I'm not qualified as a Zen teacher, but why I find Zen helpful, they talk about, are you practicing from a gaining idea, or are you, in other words, are you striving? And so how much striving are you doing? And that striving then kind of becomes a little bit of this ability for you to figure out if you're striving in a way that maybe is less beneficial, or striving in a way that is beneficial. So there's not right and wrong, or at least in practice, it's not helpful for us to characterize it as right and wrong necessarily. But it's like trying to look at from a beneficial or not beneficial stance. And if you listen to a little bit of Joseph Goldstein, he seems to be trying to strike that with people when they ask him questions and such. So again, Jeff Warren has a bit more experience with this. But when he talks about being your own teacher, part of being your own teacher is matching a technique to where you're at now. So in the form of unified mindfulness, there's lots of choice, which is great. And for some people, the problem with unified mindfulness is there's lots of choice. Where do you start, or what do you do? And so for a lot of folks, that's where they talk about having a coach or a teacher, or someone who's at least kind of walking that practice path, be able to look at that perspective. So it's more of a, for me, I could feel like I was driving in a way when I was sitting for for long periods. I was driving in a way that wasn't beneficial. But if you sit on a cushion, one of the nice things about sitting cross-legged and such is that if you're like me, your body will begin to get stiff, and you won't sit as much because it's harder on your body. So that's one natural way of kind of backing off sitting too much. But I think that you can begin to get a sensitivity towards when it's a gaining idea, when you're operating from a gaining sort of perspective, as opposed to more of like an exploration sort of perspective. And so to your point, you're saying that you want to try everything. And so there's a sample, or at least I have had a sampling period in my practice where at the very beginning, I was doing more mindfulness. I was doing Vipassana sort of stuff. I was doing Zen things, and I was very much sort of sampling, like kind of looking at different things. And this is a little bit what you see when people like, I can't think of his last name. The book is called Range. He also wrote the book about Sports Gene. I think his last name is Epstein. But him and Malcolm Gladwell had this sort of very interesting debate about sampling periods versus early specialization in musicians and sports and athletes and things like that. And so I think there's a sampling period, and then to some degree you sort of settle down. And my Zen practice is benefited in a huge amount by the time that I spent doing more old school Vipassana breath meditation. And so I gained a lot of concentration and clarity from those practices. And so I had almost to do those practices for some time to be able to lean back and be more in that lantern awareness. But I had to do more spotlight stuff at the beginning for me to do that. Maybe I could have just started out with the lantern and it would have worked. I don't know. As an experiment of one, or N of one, I can't rerun that experiment. So, but yeah, it's a. I obviously don't have a very good grade, I don't obviously don't have an answer, but that's the best response I can offer. So, but thank you for the report. So, and then I'm confident that you will arrive at an answer of where to direct. I think there's like a kind of a that sampling period, and then they're sort of settle into this is resonating with me more, or this worked at the beginning of my practice and it's not working as much. So you can look for that staleness or dullness and play around a little bit. So, but thank you, Sarah. And anyone else that stayed on, it looks like there's maybe 2 other folks that are on. So, so tomorrow's Friday, and I'll see you then.